Okay, so welcome back to the Revit project tutorial set 2. We're on the last tutorial in this set. As you can see, I've changed my floor slab there. I've deleted the test one I had earlier on and have placed a rectangular one that fronts the street and goes right to the boundaries of the site. I've also got a smaller one towards the back which will be my parking. Now, the most important thing you need to note about this site is the size of the site. Now, this front slab that I've placed in will represent my bar, and it's a little bit over 150 square meters. Now that gives you an indication of how big the site is. So if you have a very large floor slab that takes up more than half the site, then it may be a little bit too big, unless of course it encompasses the units as well. So bear in mind that your wine bar cannot exceed 150 square meters overall in floor area. Now the one I have at the back for parking will fit 3 car spaces, and that one is 6 meters by 9 meters. So please keep the scale of your design in mind. You have plenty of space in this site, and you can go up to 2 stories as well. Okay, so let's start on some external walls. I'm just going to zoom into this front slab for a minute. Now, walls are very easy to create, and you can find the wall tool in the Home tab underneath wall. And if you click on that little black arrow, you can see that like the floor, there are a number of different wall tools there. We just want a standard wall, so click on the wall tool. Now at this stage we need to go into the floor plan of that front slab, which is bar ground floor, I think. Now if you can't see anything in your plan, it's probably 2 very good reasons. First, the elements that you're looking for may not be on the plan itself, and secondly, and this is where my mistake comes in, I'm actually looking at a ceiling plan and not a floor plan, so please keep aware of that. So here's my bar ground floor floor plan. Okay, here we go. So here's my front slab. I'm just going to turn the wireframe off into a hidden line view because I don't want to see the slab edges underneath it when I'm creating my walls. Okay, so let's call up the wall tool. Now you can see an options bar up here, as well as contextual tab and a whole heap of wall properties here. Now I'm just going to accept the default in the properties for the moment and focus on placing the wall. So let's go into the draw panel, and I'm going to choose the pick line methods because I want to choose the edges of that floor slab. Now that was very quick, but let's go through some of the details of this wall. First thing first is it's grey. Okay, so let's go down here to the detail level and change this to fine so we can see the materials of this wall. So it's double brick, and that corresponds with the wall type that we've just chosen over there. Now let's run into a section and see how it's placed that wall on top of our floor slab. So let's go over to the other side. So here's our wall. A couple of things. I'll actually go over to the other side. Here we go. First thing is the wall center line is actually aligned with the edge of the floor. So that means a part of the wall is overhanging past that slab. That's not what we want. We want the external edge of that wall to align with the external edge of that floor slab. And the second thing is you can see very clearly the wall is actually too tall. So it actually goes past our roof level. Now, depending on your design, you might want your wall to stop at the roof level, so it goes through 2 stories, or at the first level, so it just covers 1 story. For the purpose of this exercise, I'll have it go straight through to the roof level, so it covers 2 stories. Now, to edit walls, it's quite easy. So if you actually accepted all the defaults and created the wall first, you can go back and edit the wall a little bit later. So let's go back into the floor plan. And it's quite straightforward. You can just select the wall and change the properties in the property palette. So let's go into, let's say, the top constraint, which is the height of the wall, so the level where it actually stops, and I'm going to ask it to stop at the bar roof. Just going to press apply and quickly switch over to the section view so you can see what's happened. So there we go. So it's done that for one wall. Now that can be time consuming when you've created lots of walls. So what you can do is just hover your mouse over one of the walls and click on the tab key on the keyboard until it highlights any chains of walls, so any walls that are linked with it. And then click, and that way you can edit a whole heap of walls at once. So let's go up to the top constraint and change that to bar. Okay, now let's run into the section very quickly and see what's going on. Okay, so it's actually stopped at the roof level for me. Now we need to fix up this thing. So let's go back into the ground floor. Now the reason why that happened was the setting for the wall that we created was set on center line. In other words, the center line of the wall will be aligned to the line of the profile of the wall, so how I actually draw the wall. Now we can change that, but we do need to see the center line of the slab, and you can see that slightly underneath there, so it's just a gray line. Now we can just grab that wall and move it over. So I can actually move from the, let's say, and I can select any edge of that, so I can actually select the midpoint of that. So let's go midpoint of wall, but on the external side, and then move it over to the middle. Now, has that actually fixed the problem? Let's go and see. So there it is. Now we can actually move it in section as well. So we can go move, and that's in the modify panel, from that edge right over to the other edge, and it'll move that for us. Now Revit does allow us to place elements in and then edit its properties or its location a little bit later, but if you spent a little bit more time thinking about how you place those walls, so let's go back into the ground floor. Now that doesn't look quite right, and probably because I'm in a ceiling plan and not a floor plan. So don't make that mistake. Let's go into a floor plan this time, and let's delete all these walls. I'm just going to click tab, click, and then delete. So let's create that wall again. This time paying very close attention to the options and the properties before we finish the wall. So let's leave the drawing method alone at the moment and look at the options bar. So the options bar allows us to specify the height before we actually draw the wall, which is great because I want to specify the bar roof as the top constraint there. Notice that if you press unconnected, you can actually put in a particular distance, which is great for low walls. So if you don't want a wall to go straight up to another level and it's only halfway, or you want to put in a retaining wall, you can actually specify a particular height. I want the bar roof for the moment. And right next to it is the location line, and this is where the alignment occurs. So I have wall center line. In other words, the center of that wall will be aligned with the lines I choose to draw the wall, which is what I didn't want in the first place. So let's choose finish face exterior. Now what that will mean is it'll align the exterior, the exterior face of the wall to the lines of the slab, which I will choose. Now over here in the properties palette, you can choose a wall of your liking. So I'm going to change it this time to brick veneer 250 timber, so I can see two different types of materials in it. And our top constraint is already there as a bar roof because it's picked it up from the options over here. And I'll just leave the rest of the settings default. So they're the two things that I wanted to make sure actually happens. Okay, so now we're ready to pick the lines again and pick the edges of that slab. Notice that as you move your mouse over that line, it has another blue dotted line there. Now what that blue dotted line represents is where the wall will actually sit. So if I move it over to the left hand side, it will put the wall on the outside of that slab, and if I move it over to the right, it will move it into the inside of that edge. So I want it on the inside, so you can see straight away, because I'm on a coarse level here, sorry, a fine level here, I can see the material straight away. So let's continue with that wall. That's fine. Like so. Now you should see your brick skin on the outside and your timber skin on the inside if you're choosing this particular wall type. Now if you don't see that, let's say, I might just quickly change this. Okay, so if you see something like this, okay, where the brick skin's on the inside and the timber's on the outside and the junction's a little bit weird, you can just select the wall, which is what I did just then, and you should see a double arrow symbol there. Click on that and it will change the orientation of the wall, and you should see a cleaner junction as well. So let's check our section. Here we go, and everything looks correct. Now what happens if I don't want a brick veneer wall, and the wall I want is actually not in the list at all? Let's select that wall and go into the drop down list. Okay, so let's say that none of the walls I want is actually in the list. This is where you will need to create your own wall type. So a little bit like the floor types that we went through in the previous tutorial, we need to duplicate this particular type and change its properties. Okay, so let's do that to this front wall, just as an example. Now to duplicate that type, we need to go to Edit Type, and this is where you see all the type properties and the duplicate button. And I'm going to call this front bar wall. Okay, now what I really want to change is the material of that front wall, but also its structure. In other words, I don't want two layers of brick, one brick and one timber. Let's say I only want one layer of timber stud, and I want timber panels on the outside and timber panels on the inside. We need to go into the edit structure, which is what we're doing, changing the structure. And you'll see something that looks a little bit confusing at first, but if you look carefully, it will make a lot of sense to you. Now, the layers that you see here are the layers of the material that you see in your wall. Now, down at the bottom left-hand corner, if you click on the preview button, move that over a little bit, you'll see the wall definition in detail. Now the first thing you need to look carefully at is the layers. Okay, so there is an exterior side to this wall definition, which is on top here, and underneath are all the layers of the material. So we have finish, which is made out of brick, and it's 110 thick, which is this one. And then we have an air layer, which is 50 thick, which is a cavity in between those two layers. And then we have the structure, which is made out of timber, and it's 90 thick. Now this core boundary just defines what the boundary of the structure is. So the brick in this case is just a finish, and the main structure here is the timber stud. So how to create our own wall? Now we've just duplicated it, so here's our front bar wall. We can now go into the layers and delete anything that we don't need. So we don't need that brick layer, and down here there's a delete button. We don't need that cavity either, but we do need the timber stud. Now we want a layer on the outside and a layer on the inside that represents the timber panel. So down here in the insert button, just press it and you'll see an empty layer appear. Let's change the function to the finish, because it will function as a finish to that. and let's make this thickness, let's say 30 thick. Before I change the material, I'm just going to insert another one in there up here, change it to finish as well, and make it 30 thick. So make sure you can see it. Now that second one I don't want on the outside, I actually want on the inside, on the other side of the timber stud. So I'm just going to select that, and down here click on the down button until it's actually showing the way I want it to. Now we'll come back and change the materials in a second. If you just press OK, OK, and go back to your wall and make sure that it's actually showing the way you want it to. Yes, it is. Okay, so let's go back into that structure. So select the wall, edit type, edit structure. Now let's change the material very quickly. I'm just going to choose, I'll just move that down so you can see that. Just going to choose timber, and OK, and the same here. Timber. Press OK, and now it should have materiality. Select the wall again, and it's actually there. When you do change the material, always have a look at what the cut pattern and surface pattern is. There may be times where you don't want a cut pattern at all, or a surface pattern. I don't want either, so that's fine. And that's an introduction to creating the external wall or wall types. Keep in mind placement, location of the wall, and the wall type itself, the wall definitions. So things like materiality or what it's made of. Now that's just an example, but you will be expected to go back into your project and start creating external walls for your building. You'll also be expected to create your own wall type, so make sure you do that. Now for those of you who are asking, what if I have a slanted wall in my design or a curved wall? Well, before we move on to set 3 of the project tutorials, I just want to quickly show you massing. Now we'll move into more detailed massing a little bit later, but I'll do a quick introduction so that you can create some of those other fancier walls. Okay, I'm just going to move into the back street for a second. Okay, so here's my back street, and I'm going to do my example on the parking lot, and I'll delete it a little bit later. Now if you want to play around with forms first before you place walls on these forms, so you want maybe something that is a little bit non-standard, you will need to look at the massing tool, and the massing tool is located in Massing and Site in the Conceptual Mass panel. Now the massing tool is fantastic for conceptual massing, so if you're still playing around with form in the very early conceptual stage. Now the massing tool I'm going to use is the in-place massing, and we will go through this in depth a little bit later. This is just a very quick introduction, okay? So I'm going to use an in-place mass. Now Revit will prompt you to say that the show mass mode will be visible. That's fine, close that. And I'm just going to call this, let's say, experiment 1. Okay, and press OK. So this is just an experiment. Now it all goes great, which is similar to the edit mode, and in fact we're in some sort of edit mode here. This is actually called the mass editor, and it's just a special interface for creating masses. We'll explain that a little bit later. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a solid extrusion, just a shape, a form with some volume, and the next thing I'll do after that is apply a wall to that side of the volume. Now I need to first draw a shape, and I do that in the draw panel. I'm going to choose an arc because I want a curved surface on one of the sides, like so. Now with every extrusion you need a profile, and a profile is just a closed shape, so I need to make sure that I have a closed shape here. So I'm just going to close this by drawing lines, making sure that there are no overlapping lines like that. So I need to make sure I modify and trim. Okay, so there's my closed shape. Okay, so once you've got a profile, let's go back into the Home tab and let's choose this profile, and you can do that by just selecting all of them. You'll see in the contextual tab, you'll see a form panel, and in that a drop down list of the types of forms that you can create. So I want to create a solid form, not a void form. A void form will cut into solids, okay, so keep that in mind. I want to create a solid form, click on that, and this is where I'm just going to very quickly click into the 3D view. Here we go, and you can see my form automatically generated. Now you'll see something on top of that, three arrows, 3D arrows. One's a red one, one's a green one, one's a blue one. They're the three axes, and if you grab one of these axes, I'm going to grab the blue one, it'll highlight. Click and drag it. It'll extrude the volume up that axis. Okay, so this is where you can control how high that volume is. Now, you can do that with the other axes as well, and this is where you can start to skew your volume. So if I choose the red one and move it back a bit, okay, you can see that that's skewed that over in the red axis. So now we have a slanted wall here, and if I do that to the green, it'll do that direction. Now we've got some really interesting shape there. Now once you finish with that volume, you're happy with it, just up here click on the finish mass. Now there's one thing to remember: just because you can create any volume you like, it may not be the most appropriate volume to use, so be aware that this still has to be constructed out of walls, floors, etc., etc. So if you have something that is really difficult to construct, then you'll have a hard time constructing your building. Okay, so I've got my mass. Now if you can't see it, you need to go to the Massing and Site tab and click on the Show Mass. Okay, and that will actually show your masses for you. You can actually turn it off as well, so that turns it off, turns it on. Okay, so how do I put my lovely wall on that, let's say that curved surface or this slanted side? If you go back into the Massing and Site tab, you'll see a number of tools in the Model by Face panel. And these tools are primarily for masses. So it allows you to put a curtain system on a mass, a roof, a wall, and floor systems. The wall one is the one I want, so click on that. Make sure that you have the wall that you want to use. So I'm just going to use brick veneer. And if you hover your mouse over the mass, it'll highlight all the masses, or sorry, all the faces that you can put walls on. Notice that it doesn't highlight the top. That's because Revit is thinking that it's a horizontal face, and therefore a roof will be more appropriate for that. So okay, I'm just going to highlight that and click, and you can just barely see that wall create. I'm going to click on that as well, and that one, and that one. Okay. Now if I go and turn that mass off, you'll see the walls have been created around that mass. Let's go into a plan, factory level, and there is, if I turn that on fine, there is our wall. Now be very careful with creating walls on complex geometry. you still need to be wary of junctions and how they join up as well. So this is a relatively straightforward mass, but if you have very complex ones, such as spheres and any other geometry that especially has a lot of curves, just be aware of how you're going to construct that. You may need to introduce some curtain systems. Now we'll come back into complex geometry and massing in some of the other tutorials. For the moment, you will need to go back into your project, have a close look at your design, and start creating some external walls for your buildings. If you really need some of the massing tools, have a look at them, but very, very carefully. And make sure you define your own wall type as well. So that ends this tutorial, and it also ends set 2. We'll go into set 3 next, which will go through the steps of creating intermediate floors. So for our next story, roof creation, and we'll move into internal walls, defining spaces, and of course windows and doors.